Lifestyle Pirates with Big J and Adriano.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Lifestyle Pirates. We're sitting here with Miranda Murray. Kia ora, Miranda. How are you?
Kia ora. I'm great, thanks, guys.
Was that all right? Did I pronounce it okay?
You did very well. Yeah, I'm impressed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, Miranda, you are a fertility coach, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, on your website, it says it uses the terms you're a holistic counsellor, a fertility expert, and life coach.
Yep.
That's quite a large piece.
It is.
Talk us through that.
Look, those are all terms, I guess, of the qualifications that I've gained to get to where I am. But at the heart of what I do is coaching, and those elements have brought in different styles of, I guess, techniques of learnings that I can help with my clients. But yeah, ultimately I'm a coach.
Yeah. And what was the piece around the fertility side of things? How did that come about?
Look, as you probably know, if you've had a look on my website, I went through a long journey of fertility to have our little girl, Zoe, who has just turned 3.
She's a cracker, by the way.
Yes, she is. We're a little bit biased, but she's awesome. She's an amazing little human already, which is so wonderful for Dan and I to see. But she was the result of 11 IVFs for me and 10 years in the making. And, Dan and I joke about that because she actually was the result of the final IVF, not actually 11. But it took me that many goes and that long journey to actually get her. So she's pretty special to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you're originally from New Zealand?
I am, yes. What gave it away, the accent?
Well, I mean, my attention to detail on the language, I think.
Amazing.
When did you make the move over to Australia?
Look, I left New Zealand in 99 and I went to London.
Yep.
Did what every Kiwi does and has their OE, their overseas experience.
Yep.
And headed over there for 2 years.
Did you live in Clapham like the rest of them?
I didn't, no. I lived in Vauxhall and Dollis Hill. Are you testing me now? Testing me. Turnpike Lane was the last place I lived, which was less than fabulous, but it was one of the most fun times of my life.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. And then came back to Oz? Or did you go to New Zealand?
I met my first, my ex-husband in London.
Yep.
He was a Perth boy.
Yep.
And so we decided to come back to Australia in, I think it was 2002. Early 2002. So September 11th had happened, and that actually bought us another 6 months on our visa because the English government was handing out tourist visas to keep everybody safe at the time.
Right.
So we were actually in London for 2.5 years, and then we decided that we would move to Melbourne because we were sort of stuck between where we would go, and he was from Perth, I was from New Zealand, and we decided Melbourne was a nice passive ground for both of us to sort of start fresh back in Australia.
Yeah, it's definitely an in-between in the two countries.
Yeah, well, and look, Perth and Auckland probably would have been too quiet for us after 2.5 years in London.
Yeah.
Which was a pretty big party stage of our lives.
Yeah.
So Melbourne was a great choice. I mean, it was busy enough. It had enough action going on to keep us
good
occupied.
Nice. So you mentioned about your kind of journey. You kind of talked about the 10 unsuccessful ones, but Zoe was the successful 11th. I mean, how does that go? For you in that journey and as a in a relationship, how do you process that?
Yeah, look, this is why I got into what I'm doing now, because what I saw through going through my journey, and particularly the first 7 that I did with my ex-husband, I obviously didn't have the golden ticket. Our marriage fell apart at the end of those 7 when we'd taken a break from having those IVF, and it dissolved, and that was heartbreaking for me. And so what we realised was that we hadn't paid attention to some of the most important things that were going on, and we actually managed things differently. So for me personally, looking back now, I wish that I had a me in my life back then, because what I realised was there was such a lack of emotional and mental support in that space. You can't fault the medical professionals. Specialists all know what they're doing really well, but actually there was not enough time, or perhaps I didn't give myself enough time to stop and actually check in with how I was going.
Mm-hmm.
And we just sort of pushed through. You know, we did 7 IVFs in the space of 2 years. So it was a lot of back to back and just sort of channeling on and, you know, just churning through and wanting to get to that end goal, which is what we held so true, but we didn't take the time to actually stop and say, hey, is this a good idea? Maybe we need to take a break and let our body and our mind and our, you know, emotional state heal through it.
So what were some of those little things that you just mentioned? What? I mean, bear in mind you're talking to 2 guys here.
Yeah, sure. So what are a couple of the things that sent me off my rails kind of thing, do you think? Or
Well, I think...
or what weren't paying attention to. So you say you missed out, or you missed a few key things that you didn't pay attention to that could have sort of led to this.
Yeah, sure. I think, look, I think when anyone enters into a fertility journey, like I grew up always knowing I was going to be a mum, and I just had that feeling, you know. I lost my mum when I was 6, and so for whatever reason, I grew up as a kid and a teenager. I was always the person at the party holding a niece or nephew who was younger. You know, I remember my dad and my stepmom saying, be careful lifting that baby, you're going to hurt your back, because I was only 10 or 11 myself. But I just had this nurturing in me that I knew that I was going to be a mum. And little did I know that by the time I decided to start trying to become a mum, I would have so much trouble. And I actually went off the pill on my wedding day because I was that sure that, you know, this is it for us. Well, we're ready. We're going to have a baby now. We've done all this partying in London. Now we're in this next responsible phase of our life. And so we just sort of went into it headstrong, and we tried naturally for about 18 months and saw a naturopath. We, you know, took every kind of Chinese herb under the sun. We were detoxing our butts off, trying to recover from the lifestyle that we'd led in our late 20s and early 30s. Excuse me. And then we, at some point, our GP said to us, look, you know, you've given it a good nudge for 18 months. It's probably time to actually investigate it further and go and see a fertility specialist. Now, that's a kick in the pants for anybody, you know, like, as we kind of feel, I think, as women and as men, that it's almost our God-given right to produce children, and that when we're ready, that's just going to happen.
Well, I think I mean, without getting too religious, like it's the Adam and Eve stuff, right?
Yeah.
You know, create the world. It's what we're here to do.
Yeah. And I think also, you know, we grew up, as certainly in New Zealand, the only kind of sex education we had at school as teenagers was don't get pregnant. You know, these are all the things you need to do not to get pregnant. And as soon as you become sexually active, you need to go on the pill, you need to be using condoms. And so that was drummed into us.
I think I got told, be careful or buy a pram.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
Cheers, Dad.
And at no
What a slogan.
That's right. And at no point was there a suggestion that it might not happen for us. You know, and so by the time we started trying and realised that we might need some assistance, I was sort of left thinking, oh, I wasted all that time and money, you know, on contraception and avoiding this topic or this situation that I desperately now want. And so I think that first step for people of having to actually admit that they might need to go and investigate things further is really daunting. I know for us in particular, it was a huge hurdle mentally. Like physically, we just booked it in and knew what we needed to do, but mentally and emotionally, there was so much angst around it because there was the fear of the unknown, of what the doctor was going to tell you. It was just being in a new situation with a new doctor for a start. The first specialist we saw was referred to us by a friend, and when we walked in, he was wearing knee-high socks and sandals. And my ex-husband and I at the time kind of did a sideways look at each other, and we're trying to park our mental models and say, let's just give this guy a go. But, you know, I don't know if he's going to be our cup of tea.
Yeah, what a faux pas.
Yeah, totally right. And we sat down with him, and he was very serious, and he said, you know, you're obviously here because you want to have a baby. And we were nervously nodding yes. And he then proceeded to tell us about the fertility reproductive life of mice, you know, in the gestation period, which is something insanely different to what humans are. And we were sitting there in an anxious state, trying to find out some information about what we'd be doing next. And he said, oh, I guess that's not really important to you, is it? And that was probably my first marker of how there maybe was a lack of empathy from some GPs or doctors in that space, or a lack of understanding of what the patient was actually going through. And so then we went down some investigatory paths to start with. That were they put me in for an operation where they put dye through my fallopian tubes to check that things were clear to start with, so that they had like a blank canvas, I guess, to work with, and they didn't need to fix something internally before we could actually try any assisted reproduction. I got the all clear with that, and they said, you've got a textbook uterus, and I was like, hallelujah, what does that mean?
Did they say textbook uterus?
Yeah, my specialist said, you've got a textbook uterus. And I said, oh, that's great. Let's go. So even then, I was filled with so much hope, and I thought, well, this is great. Like, we've got all the tools we need. My ex-husband was 5 years younger than me. I was like, the average age that we've got as a fertility couple is great. There's a lot of hope for us. And so we set forth into the first treatment, which was something called IUI, which is where they turkey baste you in the clinic. It's this a sperm sample's given, and then they inject the sperm directly into the woman. And unfortunately that didn't work for us, and so they said, because of your age, and I think I was 35 at the time, they said, let's now look at IVF. So that was the next big hurdle for us to get over, because obviously that requires a lot more physical involvement of the woman, because it's a lot of injections and pumped full of hormones, whereas the initial IUI is less invasive.
Right.
Yeah, so then that's where we set off from and embarked into our first IVF procedure, which, for both of us was scary, and for me was it was, I guess, harrowing, because it was a whole lot of new medical things that I was having to deal with and remember, and pumping myself full of these hormones and injecting myself, twice a day. So yeah, it's a tough process. Even me talking about it now, I have to sort of think back to what it was like, because now, I feel so lucky that we've got Zoe. And even when I was pregnant with her, I felt a little bit guilty that I had such an easy pregnancy. And a girlfriend said to me, have you forgotten the last 10 years that you've been through? And I said, you know what, I kind of almost have a little bit, because I'm just fully present on this and so grateful. But when I hear from my clients, and when I think back to myself of what I went through, there's so much pressure on you as a woman, and also as you as a couple, if you have somebody else in your life going through it with you, because of all the new things. Everything's new every day, and it becomes a bit of a chore. I think that's the other thing, that every 2 days I was having to go across town in Perth to have a blood test at 7:00 in the morning, where they were checking hormone levels from the drugs that they were pumping in, and then an internal ultrasound. It was all very invasive things that trying to conceive weren't really on my radar. I just went about my life happily and had my annual health checks, and you sort of tick that off and off you went. Yeah. Whereas this was becoming like a regular appointment, and something that was quite invasive. I learnt quite early on that my pride kind of went out the window. Like, I spent so much of 10 years in stirrups. I joke about it now, but I think one of the doctors I met for the first time when I had my legs in stirrups, and I was like, this is awkward. You didn't even buy me a drink first, like, and for me, you asked before about how I coped with these kind of things, and a lot of it was bringing humor into it, like still trying to hold on to that sense of humor that I have, that I carry through life. But at times it was really hard. And I think, the reason I do what I do is because I feel there's such a need for support in this space, and for people to be reminded that those things are important. Those little moments of actually finding joy still in some of the things that you do, because I'd sort of let that go.
So when you were going through those 10 IVFs, did you have a support group to talk to? Did you have anyone?
No, not really. Like,
I find that must have been very emotional.
Yeah.
You needed to talk about it.
Yeah, look, I think the first 7 IVFs in Perth, obviously I was younger. I didn't have any family in Perth. It was all of my ex-husband's family who were there. I had some great girlfriends, but we were the first of our group of friends to get married, and the first to start trying to have children. and ultimately the last for that to happen to, and happen separately. And so in the beginning, there was nobody else really to talk to. I knew we knew one other couple who were in Melbourne who were about 10 years older than us, and we knew when we were living in Melbourne, we knew about that they were going through IVF, so we saw what they went through. So they were kind of my support network, I guess. And I say my because it was really me reaching out to them. I think there's a different way. I mean, it's individual for everybody, but there's also different coping mechanisms for men and women. And for me, it was to find out some more information and to talk about it and be open about it. But in Perth itself, there wasn't really anybody I could speak to. And we were quite cautious as to who we shared that information with, because there's a lot of shame that comes with struggling to conceive, and rightly or wrongly, that's what we do as humans. And there's a lot of self-blame. There's a lot of blaming each other. There's a lot of guilt and jealousy of other people who get pregnant, and so all those things kind of come up, and I tapped into a few IVF forums, which there's hundreds of thousands on the internet, but it actually wasn't for me, and I think for some people that's a good space to gain that support. But for me, when I tapped into them, they were women who had listed, like their signature on their sign-ins was the number of IVFs they'd done, the number of miscarriages they'd had, what stage of their cycle they were at, ovulation day 3 or whatever. And it was just too much, the overwhelm that it created for me was too much. So I actually sort of dipped in, had a look around and left. And I didn't really find that support group that I needed. These days, I'm aligned with an amazing woman called Krista Peters, who has set up exactly that, a group for women going through IVF. It's called Together We Wait, and it's a play on TWW, which is the 2-week wait between having an embryo implanted and the 2 weeks you wait to have a pregnancy test, which is an amount of time where you're just sort of left hanging.
Yeah.
And so we connected when we were both going through our IVF journeys, and she has set up this group that I help support any way I can, because she's doing an amazing job. She wants to turn it into a not-for-profit, but she's created a community where women can go into and actually have those conversations with them. And it's, the power that I see coming out of there. A couple of my clients I have sent that way because I can't be there 24/7 for them, and the connections they've made have really helped them to get through those stages where they need somebody to talk to.
And I can imagine actually having a community of people that are going through the same or that have been. It's great to hear you go through your bit, and your clients would love your catch-ups, and we'll kind of dive into that. But hearing it from someone else as well, that's...
Yeah.
It probably
Absolutely.
it verifies actually that things are okay, that it's not taboo, that I'm not the only one. You spoke a minute ago about the kind of shame side of things. How does that play out for the husband or the partner? And does that play out differently if it's maybe a same-sex couple as well? So if it's a lesbian couple trying to do that, I mean, what's the partner going through at this stage? Because from what I've picked up from you, it's an emotional minefield of almost isolation.
Yeah.
How does it go on the other side?
Yeah. Look, it's a roller coaster of emotions for everybody involved. And I think we often, I could choose my words carefully here, because we often are aware that the woman going through it is going through all of these things, and sometimes forget to check in with what the partner's doing or how they're feeling. And having, I don't have the golden ticket, obviously, I'm on my second marriage, but having experienced, going through it with 2 different partners and the different reactions and the different responses, then, I can certainly say that the shame is there on both sides, particularly if it's an unexplained infertility, which is how I was diagnosed with my first marriage. It was unexplained, which carried so much more uncertainty for us because we didn't have any answers.
Yeah.
Like it almost would have been easier to have somebody say, "Oh, this is what we've pinpointed the problem to be. Let's attack that now." But having no answers, then you're just sort of left in this limbo land of, I don't know what's happening and why isn't it happening for us, and is it me, is it you? And so I think the shame sits with both partners. I think for men and potentially for same-sex partners, the ones who aren't going through the treatment, they're left feeling helpless, really. They're having to sort of take a back step and watch everything happen, and they can only help so much, and I think the other thing that occurs is when you're going through the fertility treatment, the hormones obviously, are pumped full of your body, and so you may not be reacting to things the way you normally would be. There's a lot of, for me, I didn't really have the highs and the lows of like the anger and frustration that a lot of people experience, but I was so absent-minded, like I'd find myself standing in the deli section of Coles and being like, I know I'm here for some reason and I don't know what it is, and at the end of the month, I'd find like 50 Post-it notes in my handbag because I knew I was like that, and I'd written myself notes, but I'd forgotten to look for the notes in the bag. It was almost that baby brain that people talk about without the baby, which is another kick in the pants. And I think, for men particularly, I'm going to say men here, but of course there's same-sex couples, and of course there's people going through IVF on their own, which, is another a whole section of like hail to the warrior, because that's a tough thing to do by yourself. But speaking from my experience with the men, then they're not really sure what they should be saying. Like they want to help and really want to be there to support their partners, but at times, particularly if the woman is acting somewhat differently to how they would normally act, then there's this feeling of uncertainty for the man, of not knowing what to say and when to say it and how to act and how involved to be and not be. So yeah, it's tough on both sides, and for the same for families, and support people. I think that's a really tough place to be as well, because you want to offer that support, but you actually don't know, and there's a fear of saying the wrong thing at the wrong time and offending somebody, or setting somebody off when they're already on an emotional teeter-tot. Yeah.
It's interesting you spoke about the offending bit. We did mention to a few of the ladies in our circles that we were talking to, and we've got a few questions, and one of them actually came up was that question, when you get married, or if you're a couple, you've been together for a long time, it's like, and something that was so innocent back in the day, are you guys going to have kids? When are you having kids? It's now almost taboo. You kind of don't want to ask.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any thoughts?
Look, I think you shouldn't ask. I think in this day and age, you absolutely should not ask, because 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage these days, whether that's natural or assisted.
Is that an Aussie stat or a global stat?
I think that's a global stat. Yeah, you can. I do some work with a not-for-profit called the Pink Elephants, and they support women around early pregnancy loss and miscarriage. So absolutely, if you want to know the 100% stats, get on the Pink Elephant Support Network website and have a look. They do an amazing job of supporting women in that space.
Yep.
And that's really important. They have a great peer support group, but that's a huge number, right? And I think it's 1 in 8 couples in Australia now have babies born via IVF. So if you look around at people you work with, or an organisation that you're a part of, and you think about those statistics, the miscarriage statistics and the IVF statistics, and you look at how many people, men and women, like it might be the partners that are affected, that's a huge number of people who are probably going through this. And so I think the question of, when are you going to have a baby is an inappropriate one these days, because we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, and people choose to share their information with the people that they want to share with. And I encourage that as well in my coaching. I say, I think it's important to share, and there's strength in vulnerability and connection, but I also think it's really important to choose your bubble of confidence really carefully.
Yep.
Who are the people that you feel you can really trust with your stuff and feel comfortable sharing that with. And I think that's, for me personally, there was a couple of situations going through my journey where somebody would open up to me about something and I felt like I needed to give back some of my stuff, and then I'd get home and I'd feel bad about it. Like it was something I wasn't ready to share with them, and I didn't want to share, and I wasn't sure if that would stay sacred within that circle. And so it's a lesson that I learned and that I share with anyone else going through it, is it's okay to choose. You know, it's okay for you to choose who it is that you share that with, and keep that quite sacred.
On the topic of things not to ask, before you mentioned that you wrote an article about the 6 things not to say about IVF.
Yeah.
I got to ask, because I'm a classic candidate for foot and mouth disease.
Yeah,
I'm really,
absolutely.
Sometimes I have no idea. Like, I'm not aware of my social sort of interaction. I can be a bit of a mong that way. So yeah, what are the things that, you know, people shouldn't ask?
Yeah, and look, first of all, I'm going to say you're not alone, so don't feel bad about that. There's a reason that I wrote these articles, and that is because these are kind of the questions that were coming up all the time, and people were putting their foot in their mouth and then feeling terrible about it. And so I thought there was, there's an importance in actually sharing that information, because it's fine to say, don't say this, but then what do you say?
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's things like, you know, just get drunk. You know, my cousin Betty, she just went out for a big night out, and hey presto, she was pregnant.
Okay, I would know not to say that.
You know, it's old people saying, oh, so and so just sneezed in the direction of, you know, John. Or John sneezed in the direction of Karen, and you know, they're pregnant instantly. It's those kind of things. I remember, and this might be too far. Tell me, you can edit it later. My mother-in-law actually said to me once, well-meaningly, did you see the documentary recently about the Great Sperm Race? And I said, no, I did not. And she said, well, on it they were talking about how the woman needs to be sexually aroused so that she has enough cervical fluid for the sperm to reach the egg. You know, I thanked her gratefully and quietly and moved on from that conversation. And later on, when I went home, I said to my ex-husband, you know, first of all, I don't want to be talking to your mum about whether I'm sexually aroused. And secondly, all of our stuff is happening in a laboratory. Like, we're doing IVF, you know, there's no sexy time happening in this respect. And it's things like that. She thought she'd seen a documentary.
What an awkward conversation.
Totally right. But she did it from a place of love. You know, she had seen this documentary and she thought there's some important information there. I'll pass it on. And so it's those kind of things. I think it's the grandmother or the auntie at the Christmas party who pats your stomach and says, oh, have you got news to tell us? And, you know, and you say, yeah, it's a food baby, you know.
I get that all the time.
Yeah, right. Or it's the periods that you're not drinking alcohol and people want to know why. You know, it's those kind of things that I think we need to avoid, and we need to be filling those moments. But first of all, just don't pry into anyone's, you know, situation about whether they're having children, because you don't know whether they've just experienced a miscarriage, whether they've been trying for years, and it's a painful point. So I think just leave that alone for a start. But if you know somebody who's going through an IVF journey and they've shared that information with you, and then you're find yourself in a place of, I don't know what to say, then things that are helpful are things like, I understand this must be a really tough time for you, and I don't want to pry into any of the private details, but I just want you to know that I'm here. You know, or it's friends that you know are going through a struggle, and Mother's Day or Father's Day is coming up. It's sending them a message, you know, the week before and saying, hey, just thinking of you and understand that next week might be tough. Here if you need a chat. You know, it's those kind of things that are much more helpful. It's checking up on friends who you've noticed have slipped out of the social scene, and you know that it's or you suspect that it's possibly because they're going through this fertility journey, and that's what can happen for some people. You know, they sort of retreat and isolate in an already isolated place. It's just checking up on them and asking if they want to go for a coffee, you know, trying to help them bring some of the things that used to bring them joy back into their life. You know, it's similar things to what you'd do to somebody who's going through a mental health challenge. You know, what are the things that you can think of that might help that person without digging too deep unless they've shared that with you? It's somebody telling you bad news and you not trying to fill the void of saying it'll be okay, because you can't guarantee that. You know, it might not be okay. but it's okay for them to feel how they're feeling in that moment, and for you to say, I'm sorry. You know, if somebody has experienced a pregnancy loss or a miscarriage, I'm sorry for your loss. You know, that's enough. You're validating how they're feeling. You're saying to them, you know, I understand it must be really tough. I can't imagine what you're going through. I'm here if you need me.
Yeah.
Those
Recognise but don't pry.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't offer unwarranted advice, I think. You know, put your legs up the wall after sex because, you know, that's going to create a boy.
Does that work? No.
Clearly not, right? Clearly not. And I probably tried that. Look, I did hypnotherapy, I did acupuncture, I did Chinese herbs. I tried everything under the sun because I was desperate to have a baby. So I think people who aren't going through it and are offering advice that hasn't been asked for can be seen as unhelpful by the receiver because they've probably tried everything. You know, they've probably done all they can do. And so I think being told something flippant like get drunk and relax is a big one. Don't ever say just relax and it'll happen because, you know, there's no guarantees. And by being told to relax in an already stressful situation actually makes you more stressed a lot of the time.
Anyone that says relax is like you're making it worse.
Yeah, that's right.
No matter what situation.
That's right.
So going back to the stat you mentioned earlier, the 1 in 8 couples have difficulty, you know, conceiving first time and going on that part. What do we put that down to, or is that something that's always been there but no one's spoken about it? Is it on the increase, the decrease?
I think it's on the increase, but look, I think there's probably a number of reasons, and I won't go into the medical reasons because I'm not qualified in that space. But I think for a start, we're waiting a lot later in life to have kids these days, you know, compared to our grandparents. So we're pushing out the age that we're starting to try to conceive. One of the first specialists, the knee-high sock guy, one of his key quirky stats that he gave us was that 16 is the best age to have a baby. And of course we sort of, you know, coughed and spluttered and said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, not mentally or emotionally, but physically, a woman's body is at its optimum at 16, right? Because women are born with a number of eggs that they're always going to have. And so at 16, they're still nice and fresh. And as you age, the quality of your eggs decreases, you know, it declines. But, you know, it's unrealistic to then advise everybody in the current society to go out and pop out a baby at 16 because not everybody's in the situation where they'll be able to support a child and still live a full life and do the things that they want to do with the people that they want to do it with.
Why are people leaving it a lot longer or a lot later to have children?
Look, I think there's a number of reasons, and it'll depend on the person and depends on what country they're brought up in, I guess, and the culture as well. You know, like for instance, in Thailand, you know, Dan and I spend a lot of time over there, but the extended family units are huge, you know, and people quite often live with their grandparents, and the grandparents are there to help support. And we live in a society where, you know, we live here in Sydney. We don't have any family in Sydney with us. And so it's just us as a family unit, the three of us. And I think people are waiting, or can wait longer until they feel like they're financially stable, till they feel like they've done a lot of the things they want to do. You know, I talked about London for me, and you know, the world is so much more accessible these days that people want to travel probably more than they used to. There's all those things that come into it. People are, you know, pursuing careers. Maybe more than they were in the old days. So I think some of those things are pushing out the age that we actually start trying. Maybe it's the pollutants because of, you know, the different foods that we eat and the preservatives that we're having. And if you speak to a naturopath, there'll be a lot of that they will talk about, you know, the irons and the minerals in our soil and things like that. So, yeah, I think first of all, IVF wasn't around forever, remember? So maybe back in the day, if you couldn't have a baby, you just left it at that and you didn't investigate further or look for assisted reproduction to be able to conceive a family.
You said something at the start which brought a smile to my face, was you know, you believe that you were just born to be a mother. It was never going to, you know, it was always on your list. Do you have clients and I guess people in your communities that you work with and things and the non-for-profits that just do give up because they've it's either, because it's not a cheap exercise, is it? So it's either the fiscal side of things is now taking a toll, the mental side of things, or the relationship side of things, and they just go, I tell you what, it's not meant to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's going to be an individual journey for everybody. And so I don't like to speak too much from other people's experiences, but certainly, it's an expensive exercise. There's a few public IVF clinics now. There's one that I know of in Sydney in particular where it's a public system. So I think, our last IVFs were 10 grand a pop. And then Medicare gives you back, I think we got back 50%. But for some people, there's obviously a waiting period as well. You fork out the $10,000 and then there's a waiting period to claim back that money from Medicare. And for some people, that's their life saving.
Yeah.
And to, coin a phrase that's probably a little inappropriate, some people are putting all their eggs in one basket. That's their only chance.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, the first try at IVF doesn't work. And so the stress involved in that and the financial strain, I think I've had a couple of people just in the last couple of years say, so Zoe's effectively $100,000 baby. And I smiled and I said, yeah, I guess she is. But I never look at her and think that, because she was so worth the journey. And obviously there was things that I gave up along the way, and we gave up as a couple to be able to, invest in our family. But it is an expensive process, and I think for some people, they're never going to get to that point where they're ready to give up, and that's sad, and that's a really hard thing for them to face, I think, because if I said, I always knew I was going to be a mum, but for me, I never had a firm fixation or thought in my head around what that looked like. I never, from a little age, the same with marriage, I never had planned out my wedding, saw myself pregnant, all of those things. It was just this feeling that I knew I was going to be a mum.
Yeah. And
then when my first marriage fell apart, that didn't disappear, But for me, it was creating a family. It was raising a child. And I signed up for the YMCA or YWCA, I think it was, Big Brother, Big Sister program in Perth, which was mentoring a child on the weekends, and that was still my path to parenting.
Yeah.
And I have 2 sets of aunties and uncles in New Zealand who are foster parents, and one couple has fostered, I think, 5,000 kids in their life in their 30 years, And I remember asking them, how many kids have you fostered? Is it 50? And they said, no, it's about 5,000 now, or 3,500. Don't quote me on it, but it was in the thousands. And I said, how is that possible? And they said, well, some came for the weekend. Some we had from birth to 18. Some were just weekly placements until they went back to their families. But for them, they were all their kids, and so for me, fostering was on the cards, or maybe adoption. But that's my experience. Not everybody's going to get to a place where they're comfortable of forming their family in some other way than the traditional method. And that's the struggle, I think, with this process, is getting to a point of acceptance and peace with whatever comes for you and what decisions you make going forward and what that looks like.
Yeah. You spoke about, obviously it's a very individual journey for the individual, but from the couple side of things, or people doing it on their own. With your coaching world, if you were to put your coach hat on now, and take on all the things that you've learned, where do you start when someone approaches you and says, hi, I've read your website, or I've met you through the group, or listened to the podcast, or whatever, like, how do you, knowing, I guess, understanding, going through the journey yourself where there was zero empathy, and the guy rocking knee-high socks and sandals, talking to you about mice. How do you start the conversation with a client?
Look, I always, it's very conversational, I guess, when people come and have a session with me. I offer 30-minute free session for all of my clients or potential clients, because I feel like I'm not going to be for everybody, so I want to see if we're a good fit for each other. And I think it's my experience of, I had a coach after just as I went through my divorce, and my experience of coaching is that you need to be really comfortable with the person that you're sharing your most intimate details with and have that rapport. And so we'll start a conversation. I'll ask them what some of the challenges are they're having, and then I'll give them a little bit of background about, how I coach and where I've come from, to give them some insight into why I do what I do and why I believe that it's important to speak to somebody who really gets what you're going through. And then if we decide that we're a good fit and we want to pursue a coaching relationship, then, we unpack a lot of the overwhelm in some of the first sessions, because what I find is a lot of the women who come to see me are sitting in this place of absolute overwhelm, like have you ever been in a situation where some challenges have popped up in life and you feel like you're just on a roller coaster and you're clinging on for dear life, and it's hard to stop and you've got no control, and that's what a lot of these women feel like they're going through. And so it's unpacking some of those things and actually getting those out on the table, and then working through some strategies of how can we cope going forward. What are some of the things that you perceive might be coming up in the future that are similar to this, and what are the strategies that we can map out specific to you to cope with that.
So do you work with just the women, or would you work with the partner as well?
Yeah, look, my specialty is women.
Yep. Sorry, let me ask a question again. So would husband and wife go to your first session or your first call, or would you just meet with the woman first?
I haven't. That's an interesting question, and I'd be open to that. I haven't had any men come to me. I've had men refer their wives to me,
right,
and have heard me on a podcast or a webinar and say, you need to see this lady. I think she'll be a great help, but they haven't actually come themselves. In my professional coaching that I do with Dan and Empathic Consulting, I've coached men.
Yep.
So certainly in an organisational environment, I've had men who then bring personal topics to the table, even though it's out there for them to talk about everything, whether it's work or personal life. But in this fertility realm, it seems to be the women who come and share their load with me.
To maybe just to help some of our listeners, maybe on the other side of the couple, what were some of the things that the man or the gentleman mentioned when they called you and said, actually, I think my wife needs to come and see you, or my partner needs to come and see you? What were some of those things that they said to you?
Just that they had lost sight of who they were. Like, they've looked at their partner and they see that they are changed as a person. And so the male partner is struggling to see the person that they fell in love with, and what's left is this anxious ball of emotional mess. And they're worried about them. They want them to be able to unpack it with somebody and get back to that light, but they don't know how to help them, because it's almost a little bit taboo that it's women's business. And I think from the male perspective, as I said before, they feel a little bit helpless in that they don't know what to say. They can't truly experience what a woman is going through emotionally and physically to really understand it. All of a sudden the man is being worded up by the doctor on periods and ovulation and things that he's never had to think of his whole life, and that chicks get, because we grow up with our own bodies, and so we know that kind of stuff. And so they're laden with all this medical information for a start, and then the emotional roller coaster of their wife or their partner going through something that's really trying, and it's hard for them to. They're helpless. I guess that's the main thing. They're helpless. They don't know how to help them, and they want their partner to get back to who they are. And for me, I coach and empower women on how can they maintain a sense of self through the journey of a fertility journey, regardless of the outcome. Because I feel like even if you're successful, but you've churned away and just gone back to back and not paid attention to some of the other things that are important in your life, and then you're left this emotional wreck with a newborn, that can bring up another whole category of issues. And there's a lot of cases of people who then go on to become pregnant and then their marriage falls apart or the relationship falls apart because they haven't dealt with everything. They've just pushed through it.
Yep.
And I know that for a fact because that's what we did. In my first marriage, we just sort of pushed on and and did what we did because we wanted to have a baby without actually paying attention to some of those other things, asking ourselves, is this financially viable for us? When do we say enough is enough? What's our stopping point? Physically, how long are we willing to do this? Do we have other options? What's the next step if this doesn't work? How many IVFs are we going to do? All of those questions, which for both partners would go through their head. But I think sometimes if a man is thinking that or a partner's thinking that, they're scared to bring that up, because you probably on both sides, I think the woman and the man is scared to bring that up with each other at times, because you go into this state of imagining what the other person is thinking, and when I talked about shame before, you're each sitting in a place, particularly if it's unexplained infertility and you don't know why it's not working, they're sitting in the space of, is it me? Is it you? I don't want to say it's you in case that's, offensive. And I think it's just a real inward struggle for everybody.
Yeah. Okay.
You mentioned on your website that you help corporate women transition from the corporate world into motherhood.
Yeah.
What are the specific challenges in that, and also going back into the corporate world if they choose?
Look, originally I was just fertility coaching, and then I had people come to me who didn't have fertility issues, but they were attracted to my style of coaching based on my story, I think, and there was something that resonated with them.
And your humour, they like.
Yeah, that's right.
They found you funny.
That's right. I think so. And you're right. There's, the people, the clients that I have, appreciate the fact that I like to have a laugh, and I will bring some of that sense of humour into things. And one of my core values is not taking life too seriously, and what I discovered was by working with these women who were not in the fertility space, that actually at the heart of all of these problems that we experience through the different chapters and challenges of womanhood were the same things coming up. It was the feeling of isolation, it was feeling lost, it was the lack of direction, or the losing their sense of self through whatever challenge. And I think one of the big target markets of mine now is women who are transitioning into motherhood for a start. You've got the fertility space where you're trying desperately to be a mum, and you've got all of the emotions that come up with that, and then you become pregnant, and then you've got all of these self-doubts and fears about, I'm going to have to keep this human alive, and yeah, that's right, and am I going to be good at that? And some people may have motherhood issues, or issues with their own mum, or expectations, fears of living up to expectations of other people's idea of what being a mum is like. Worries about what that means for their career. Do they park their career? How much time do they take off? What kind of mother guilt is going to come in by going back to work at a certain time? And then you've got motherhood, where you're learning a brand new role, and that's daunting and scary for a lot of people. And there's a sense of losing your identity a little bit in there. And I speak from experience, it's the most magical time in the world. But at certain points, you just feel like you're a milk machine, or you just feel, like you're there to serve other people on somebody else's schedule. And so I think then at the other side of that is going back into your job and reestablishing the things that you used to be prior to becoming a mum. And that's what I'm really passionate about, is how do you hold on to, well, first find, if you don't know what it is, that strong sense of self before you go into these chapters, so that when you're coming out the other side, you actually still are connected to that person that you've always been. That's never changed. And that's where you find your peaceful flow in life, is to stay connected to that person. All these other things are just amazing add-ons that enhance your life. But at the heart of it, if you can come back to who you are, then it makes it a little bit easier, because there are, the feelings of being out of the loop if you've taken a career break and you go back into an organisation. Dan and I did a survey years ago when I was pregnant around exactly that, parental leave and the challenges that come with that. And there's a lot of issues that come up, particularly in corporate environments, of being left behind. Like you take that career break out of your career, and next minute you go back and everybody else who was at the same level is now escalated to a higher place, and you're coming back in, and a lot of times the job role had changed, you know, and it was outside of their power. You know, some of the stories that we've heard from women in big organisations is frightening, really. It's scary to think that not only are they stepping back into a job that they've taken time out of, but they're also stepping into something that may have changed without their prior knowledge.
Yeah. Well, they feel like alienated as well when they go back.
Yeah, and also, I mean, their capacity in a lot of areas has changed. You know, you've now got a child to care for, and so if things pop up as they do when children are young and toddlers, you know, they're often sick, and so you may need to drop things and leave, or leave for school pickup and things like that. Not everybody is in a position where they can afford to have nannies, you know, and particularly I think these days and COVID times, financial worries become increased. Kids are at home a lot. There's that added challenge now of actually parenting while your children are in the background as well. So I think navigating that space brings up all these different experiences and emotions as well.
So this is actually where I mean, a lot of big companies now talk about flexible working hours. So I get the sense this actually might help, you know, the working family now. You know, if you can, you know, if you can go, right, actually, I've got to nip out because little one's going to daycare. I've got to take him or her to the doctor, but they can make up the time elsewhere. It actually might. I get the sense it might take the pressure off.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting space because, you know, I got into my coaching because of the lack of empathy and support in our communities for things around family life, I guess, and womanhood. And now, despite COVID bringing up a whole lot of horrible parts that, you know, have affected everybody differently, in some ways it has brought more attention to companies to actually have more empathy for how people live on a day-to-day basis and bringing their whole selves to work. And that includes what happens in your home, you know. And some of my clients I've heard say this has been the best period of their life because they've sat down to dinner and breakfast together as a family every day. And prior to COVID happening in isolation, that wasn't happening because mum or dad was having to, you know, they were juggling the school or the daycare drop off and pick up to get to early meetings and to get home from late meetings. And so it was quite often that one or the other was not at a family meal, for instance. And so I think, flexible working is something that companies are more open to. And there's a lot of situations where perhaps companies who had crossed it off, you know, off the table to start with have now been forced to use it, to utilise it, and seeing that it actually can work.
I think it's great.
You mentioned on your website as well, the key to your personal success is to step outside of yourself and to seek higher purpose. I have to ask, what is your higher purpose and how did you find it?
That's a great question, thank you. Look, when I was separated and had come out the end of that very dark tunnel, and don't get me wrong, there was a lot of moments of dancing around my lounge room drunk, singing a few, you know, Bridget Jones's Fuck You into the night time with the dogs looking on at me a bit disgusted.
Cheeky Shardy or Sauv Blanc?
There was a Pinot Noir.
Oh,
cheese board Pinot Noir, a few girlfriends, you know. There was definitely plenty of those moments, you know, going out and with the girls from work and getting down on the dance floor, and you know, there's different ways of coping. But there's definitely I've forgotten the question.
What is your high purpose and how did you find it?
So my as part of when I came out of that dark tunnel, I decided that it was a year to give back and to regain perspective. You know, like I'd been through some absolute crap, and I was like, right, well, I've dealt with that. What's next? You know, and that's also part of my coaching is let's acknowledge all the crap that's gone on before, but let's not stay there, planted there. Let's actually look forward with some momentum and move to where we want to be. And I'd always wanted to sponsor a child in a third world country. And at the time, my hubby had said, no, let's not do that for whatever reasons. And I was in this real place of being newly separated, about to turn 40, and I am woman, hear me roar, I'll do what I want with my money. And a girlfriend, one of my best friends in New Zealand, I was home licking my wounds in New Zealand one Christmas, and she told me about this amazing charity that's Australian-based called Hands Across the Water, and they support 7 homes and community projects for at-risk children in Thailand. And she said, have a look at these guys. You know, I was still in Perth at the time. She said they're Australian-based, so they might be of interest to you. And I was sold straight away. I was enraptured by what Peter Baines had done to support these kids and what he still continues to do. And so I signed up and sponsored a child, and there was my another step to me mothering. You know, it was ticking my motherhood box, whether it was traditional or not. For me, that was important. And she said, look, they also do this really cool fundraising adventure. It's cycling across Thailand, 800 Ks in 8 days. Do you want to do it? And I said, you are crazy. You know, like I'd been on a bike since high school. She was in her 60s and it was recovering from a broken leg. And so she needed a challenge, and over several good bottles of Sauv Blanc, Kiwi Sauv Blanc, we got Dutch courage that weekend and we signed up. Yeah. And so I flew back to Perth and announced to the world that I was going to set off and do this crazy bike ride, not being a cyclist, and bought a bike and started training, and everyone thought I'd lost my mind. You know, my marriage had broken up and I'd gone through a midlife crisis, but they supported me 100% because it was such a huge thing to be doing. And so I trained solidly for the year, and we trepidatiously set off on that journey 12 months later, and arrived in Bangkok along with 46 other nervous cyclists, and did our bike ride. And on that ride is when I met Dan, my current husband. So love and lycra it exists. If he can love me sweaty and chafed, then, you know, there's hope for us yet. But for me, that being part of that group was life-changing for me. You know, I'd already made that decision back in Perth to do something positive, to regain perspective and actually put my stuff in check. You know, like it was huge, and I didn't undervalue what I'd been through, but I also needed something to move on with. And on that bike ride, I remember, you know, you'd go on different legs for 25 Ks before you had a drink stop, and I'd end up cycling next to somebody new, and we'd share our stories. And, you know, I was there saying, I've just come out of, you know, my marriage has broken down, and there'd be older people on the bike ride who would say, oh yeah, I'm on my 3rd marriage. Cool. And it was like this like reality check of, oh, I'm not that special. You know what I mean? Like, actually, this is not as big a thing in my head as maybe I'm making it out to be. And other people have been through that. But the group was there for a combined joint purpose, you know, of something bigger than what was going on in their own lives. And there were cancer survivors. You know, there was people who had lost their jobs, there were marriage breakdowns, there was all sorts of things going on. But these people had come together to make a better life for these children who were way more underprivileged than we were. And for me, it was such an enriching experience, because not only did I have this incredible experience of cycling through Thailand and seeing elephants on the side of the road and stuff, I also met some incredible people, you know, and they became my family. So I then had this extended family outside of what my old network was in Perth. And it opened my world, so to speak, you know, and it gave me something else to focus on for a moment rather than just my own stuff. And yeah, I can't speak highly enough of it. People laugh about the 800 Ks, but that was actually the reward for raising the $10,000. That was the hard part. You know, raising the money is the hard part, asking people for donations and going on this journey with all these amazing like-minded people. That's actually a reward. And at the end, we cycled into the orphanage and we got with a home, and we got to see the kids who we'd raised all that money for, and we'd sat on the saddle and put in the hard yards for, and to see the joy on their faces and to experience their life and how grateful they are every day for everything that they have is just an experience that I say you have to do it yourself. Like at some stage you have to go and do something like that, whether it's hands or whether it's something else, to experience people in a different culture living a different way who have next to nothing but are so happy and so grateful. You know, it's beautiful to see. And I mean, Adriana, you'll appreciate this. I came from my old life in Perth where I drove an Audi R8. I was a university counsellor, you know, and sometimes my ex-husband would say, hey, I need to take the Beamer to site because it was an X5. Can you take my car? And I'd say, I don't want to take, you know, the R8 to university. And I'd drive through campus over speed bumps and there'd be all these young uni boys mainly who would like see me and they'd be like, you know, doing in slow motion for me to wind down the window, and I'd wind down the window and they'd be like, yeah, rev it up. You know, and I was the student counsellor, the student advisor, and I was like, I'm not doing that on campus grounds. But also I'd then park my car in the car park next to all the professors' old beat up old cars, you know, and that was the kind of lifestyle I had in Perth, but actually it was so not as enriching as my experience was after that. You know, it was just stuff. That was just stuff, and it certainly doesn't
Puts it into perspective.
breed your happiness. It makes life easier for sure, but to then go and see people living with next to nothing and the joy that they can have from everyday experiences and relationships that they've created and connection and love, it was an amazing perspective check for me.
Awesome.
Do I remember correctly that actually you had a bit of you had your wedding ceremony there as well? Was that right?
We did, yeah.
In one of the orphanages. That was easy to say.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, orphanages. It is. And look, Pete, who's the founder, doesn't actually like calling them orphanages, and that's why I pulled myself into check before, because I think the word orphanage, you know, drums up ideas of, you know, Annie, you know, the movie Annie, and or some horrible environment where kids are mistreated, and the homes in Thailand are so beautiful and the staff are amazing and the kids just
let's give a plug. What do they actually do?
Hands Across the Water.
What do they actually do? Let's give them a plug.
So Hands Across the Water was set up by Peter Baines, who lives here in Sydney, and he was one of the forensic detectives who was part of the 2004 tsunami over that hit Thailand, and so he went over there and was part of that crisis cleanup, and obviously saw some horrific things and came home a changed person, knowing that he needed to do more. And so he set up the first home in Khao Lak in the south of Thailand. And then from there, over the years, he's built more and more homes and community projects to help these underprivileged or at-risk kids have a better life, full of more opportunities. And now there's, I think, 56, don't quote me on that, 56 or around there number of kids at university who now have such an amazing life of choice due to what Pete and his wife Claire have, you know, founded and put together and continue to do so. And obviously during these times, it's tough for them. It's tough to be a charity at this time. And the kids, you know, as much as COVID has changed our lives over here, it doesn't change their needs. Yeah. And so, you know, they're pivoting like crazy. One of the big fundraisers is the bike rides, and obviously that can't take part right now. So this year they did a virtual ride, and they've got some other ideas for later in the year to do some at-home gala dinners, seeing as we can't all come together like we normally do, to help continue to raise money, because the kids, they still need our help, you know, and every week there's still new kids coming into the orphanage or into the home. So even though the older kids may have grown up and are at university, and some of them have gone on to work,
awesome,
there's still new babies that are coming in that need help. And Home Hikers, the home in the far northeast of Thailand up near the Lao border, and it's really close to Dan and my heart. And we actually eloped up there in the Christmas of 2016 and got married with the kids. And Matthew, who runs the orphanage, and she's practicing as a Buddhist monk at the moment, so she gave us our wedding blessing that we both have tattooed on our bodies. And we actually went on to Barcelona and had our 4th IVF on our honeymoon and came home pregnant with Zoe. So that was a pretty magical experience.
I feel like we can't kind of continue on this chat without you just talking to us about Zoe. What's she like?
Yeah, so look, Zoe is such an amazing little human already. We had her first daycare report a couple of weeks ago that had us proud as punch, because it said she likes to take charge when she's given the opportunity to be a leader. and lead in lots of situations.
Just like mum and dad.
That's right. And that she shows the utmost empathy for kids in the playground when they've hurt themselves. And I said to Dan, I'm so proud. She's completely on brand. So we laugh about it. And I mean, Dan probably will tell you this as well, that at home, if we're ever having a niggle with each other, you know, we pull ourselves in check and sort of say that wasn't very on brand for Mr. and Mrs. Empathy. So for us, it's enriching and enlightening to see Zoe every day. Like, I think when you do have kids, it reminds you to see life through a child's eyes, and the joy that she brings, and the courage that she has, and she's such a brave little thing. You know, like she was at swimming lessons yesterday, and she leaps off the side of the pool like she's a 13-year-old, you know, and she's only just turned 3. So I love that she embraces life with gusto.
Yeah.
But still wants to twirl in a princess dress sometimes. So yeah, she's got the adventuring spirit as well, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to another question we got, if I may. So before we wrap things up, using your coach hat, but also your mum hat.
Yeah.
What kind of messages would you give to a 20-year-old Miranda, a 30-year-old Miranda, you know, a 40-year-old Miranda, you know, Amanda? Who's Amanda?
I get it. It's tough to say.
Yeah. What kind of messages would you give to yourself?
Oh, geez. Look, I think to a 20-year-old me, it might, in all honesty, it might be freeze your eggs. You know, if I'm being like really practical and pragmatic about it, because I didn't know that was an option back then, and perhaps pre-London, I might have frozen my eggs before I went off into Partyland and just thought that I'd park parenthood for, you know, what I thought was 10 years that ended up being 20 years. I think I would tell myself to just give more things a go, you know, and not wait to be perfect. My 30-year-old self, look, I think with my coach hat on, I think the 3 pillars of my coaching are head, heart, hug, if I can break it down easily for people. And head is arm yourself with information. You know, it's ask all the questions that you feel like you need to ask so that you can regain some of the control that you're going to feel that you've lost as part of a fertility challenge that I was about to embark on. Just ask as many questions as you can and fill that void of just being on that roller coaster ride with more things that are going to make you feel in control. The heart is make sure you're doing more of the things that make you happy. And even in the tough times, you know, the dark days and nights, try and remember some of those things that light you up so that they can get you through those moments that are really challenging and that you're struggling through. And then the hug is get a really great support network around you. You know, make sure that you surround yourself with people who lift you up and that people you can trust. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable and share what you're going through, because there's probably a good chance that there's other people that are going through it who might get it, and there's strength in numbers, you know, if you can surround yourself with the right people. I think, you know, for me, I have a painting on the wall in our house that says, do more of the things that make you happy, because I think sometimes we forget, you know, and I think we get tied up in life and being a parent or being a partner or being an employee or a boss, and we just get on that hamster wheel of having to do the things we think we should, instead of bringing in some of the things that actually make us feel who we are at the heart of us. I think, you know, I mean, I can throw this back to you guys. You know, I know that you both love music, and John, what's one of your favourite clubs in London? Taking it back to my London days, or what's one of the clubs over there you wish that you'd had a chance to play at?
I was quite fortunate actually, because I got to DJ at Turn Mills the night before I got married.
Yeah, amazing.
And I actually got to play at Ministry of Sound, which was pretty good because you can't do it now. What was one of the clubs? I'd tell you what, I'd probably like to play at those 2 clubs again, but to a bigger crowd.
Yeah, amazing.
Not in the cloakroom.
And yeah, not in the cloakroom. Yeah, yeah. I think that would be me. I missed the DJing circuit 100%. I really enjoyed it. It was certainly a release for me, and it was completely the other end of the scale from, my corporate life and maybe not my corporate persona, because a lot of people knew that I ran an event, but just the release and being able to influence people's emotions by a song that you play, and see people react and respond. I'll never ever forget some of those nights. Incredible,
amazing.
Incredible, yeah.
And so, what stopped you from making that your career?
The money, the money. But also, I didn't. And this is where Adriana and I are we're so very similar, but we're so different as well. So whilst we both DJ, I had no desire to produce my own music.
Yeah.
Whereas Adriana and 2 other guys do it under Elustis. So they not only play but they produce.
Yeah.
I was always just quite happy to play.
Yeah. And do you still do that now?
Not as much as I'm the best DJ in Piedmont in a 2-bedroom apartment. Not as much. Again, I would like to do it. We were reminiscing the other day actually about just, I don't know, maybe doing some tough laps on the harbour and getting just for old time days. Maybe a digital therapy reunion or something like that.
Yeah.
So stand by, watch this space.
And hearing you talk about what you get out of that experience, those are the things that I'm encouraging people to, make sure you hold on to those things that do bring you joy, because there's a reason that they're there.
Yeah.
And there's a reason that they're a part of who you are.
Yeah.
And whether your corporate world knew that you're a DJ or not, we know that that's a part of what makes Big J tick and make you so amazing.
Yeah.
What about you, Adriano? Is there anywhere that you wish that you'd played or?
I wish I played a Gas nightclub here in Sydney.
Yeah.
Or, just Gas or Tank nightclub for house music.
Yeah.
I missed out on that sort of. I went to those clubs, but I just wasn't any good, I suppose. No, I wasn't anyone back then to be able to play at those clubs. I'd love to go back there. I do miss gigging. The last gig that we had just before, all of this, the world went crazy, was in Thailand at a festival called Unconscious. That was fantastic.
Yeah,
It's probably one of the best feelings I've ever had in my life, really, to be up there. And just making so many people move. It was awesome. Yeah.
And what are the things that you love most about DJing then?
It's just the interaction with so many people at one time.
Yeah.
You're just moving air in speakers, and for some unknown reason, everyone sort of forgets what they've got going on in life and just enjoy that one moment, which is, for me, that's the reason. That's the reason. It's to be completely lost into that moment right there.
Yeah,
that's
amazing.
why I do it. Yeah.
Be present.
Yeah, definitely.
Amazing.
Sounds like you're going to come on and interview us next week.
That's right.
Well, Miranda, I think we will wrap it up there because you do have to get back to your lovely daughter and lovely husband. Thank you very much for taking the time.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me on.
I think
that was awesome.
I think we've both personally got a lot out of it. We were a little bit anxious this morning. I'm still got quite clammy hands, but I really appreciate you taking us on your journey and seeing how you do help other people. You are the ultimate empathy couple, both of you. I've never met a couple that gives so much. So thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind.
And we'll put all the links and stuff on the piece. But until then, we'll see you again soon.
Guys.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Cheers.
You too.